I decided to make a recipe of white bread, but this also has some whole wheat in it. So it's going to be not your traditional totally white bread, but whole wheat. So one of the first things I have to do is to heat the milk, the butter. I'm going to put honey in here. That's the sugar for my yeast. And get this one clean. So I'll put the honey in, and we're going to have to watch how we do this because you never want to get honey very hot. You kill the enzymes in honey. Honey has a lot of good enzymes, good stuff for you. And a cup of water. And we're going to heat this very slowly to about 110, 120 degrees. I did proof my yeast already, and it said to put the extra water in here, and I'm not going to do that because I've got the yeast in. I wanted to make sure that the yeast was working, so I've let it sit, and it has some action going. So I'm going to put the yeast in with the flours, and I have whole wheat flour and I have bread flour. Bread flour has more gluten in it, and that helps with the whole wheat flour because whole wheat flour, if you use strictly whole wheat flour, you'd have a very heavy, flat bread that wouldn't rise very much. So it's good to have that mixture with the bread flour and the whole wheat. It will make a nicer, lighter product than if it was strictly 100% whole wheat. So that's something when you go to grocery stores and you see 100% whole wheat, they have to add some other things to make that a little bit lighter. It's a very hearty bread, but it takes a little bit to get that to rise. And yeast is a microorganism. I keep talking about that it needs sugar to grow, to make carbon dioxide. It needs salt to control the growth, otherwise it would grow out of control. I once heard a story about in the army they have to make things by the big vat full. You know, if they bake bread, they're going to make to feed, you know, hundreds of people. And so they were making bread and they forgot to put the salt in their whole bread that they were making. And so they had all this yeast growing and growing and growing, and it just continued to grow. They couldn't use it because there was no controlling it. It was out of control, and so they had to dump it all, but then it just kept spreading and growing. So you really, there's you know, that you need sugar for it to grow, and you need salt to control that growth. So there's a couple things going. So we'll let this start heating up, and then, like I said, I've got the flours together, and then we'll can finish mixing once this is all heated. Okay, my butter is melted. I've checked the temperature of this, and it's about 120, about 110 degrees actually. I just hate to do it too hot. The other thing I needed to add to this mixture here was the salt. And it took a tablespoon of salt, so that's quite a lot of salt, but as I said before, we need to keep the yeast growth under control. So I'm going to add the rest of this. I think I'll take this off and put this in. It's a little easier to pour this way. We'll do a little mix, and the this mixer uses the dough hook. I'm using the dough hook, not a regular beater. This is what the dough hook looks like. And I use the electric mixer for this part. Put it on stir. You don't want it to go crazy. Otherwise, you'll wear it. And sometimes I do that. I decide to wear what I'm cooking. You know, it gives it a little flavor. And while that's going, I'm going to crack the egg. I have my knife. Everybody always comments on my brown eggs. We have a friend who raises chickens, and his chickens happen to lay brown eggs. So not much difference in the brown or the white, just the breed of the chicken. So that egg is ready. I want to scrape this, make sure all the flour gets mixed in, because the flour's on the bottom. Sometimes it doesn't get clear down to the bottom, so you need to do a little scraping. And once this is all mixed, then I'll add the egg, get that mixed in, and then this recipe says to add the remaining whole wheat flour, and it called for 2.5 cups, so we started out with 1 cup. So we're just getting a little bit of a mix here, and then we'll take it to we'll add the rest of the whole wheat flour, and then add enough bread flour to make it a nice dough. Okay, I'm going to add the egg. Okay, and I will add another 1.5 cups of whole wheat flour. Make sure you turn your mixers off before you add this flour, otherwise you'll have flour all over everything. And that's it for the whole wheat flour. I'm going to let that stir slowly until that gets mixed in. And then we'll see how our dough is doing. This is a pretty stiff dough, and I'm going to add some more bread flour to it, and then I'll turn it out and do some kneading. But I want to get this a little bit stiffer right now. I think I'll do it this way because I set my cup in something. Do about a cup of bread flour. And that's about as much flour as I'm going to add to this mixer and then we'll turn it out onto a floured surface, and then I'll do the kneading by hand, the rest of the kneading by hand. This mixer with the dough hook, does a pretty nice job of working in all that extra flour. It's a pretty stiff dough right now. But every recipe usually takes oil of some sort, butter, which was the shortening the oil today, sugar to feed the yeast, salt to control the yeast, liquid, whether it's milk or water, and flour. And there's all kinds of different flours. There's rye and whole wheat and flax flour, so every one of them has a different flavor. Sometimes you use potato water, and you can use potatoes as a solid in it. So there's a lot of different things you can do with breads, and it's fun to experiment and try different things. Okay, there we have. It's a very stiff dough. You can see that. It's a pretty stiff batter. And it's going to take up quite a bit of flour yet. I can tell that, but I think I'll knead that into it while we're working over here. So I have to get a bowl ready, and I have to do some preparation here. I'm ready to turn the bread dough out onto the counter, and I've got quite a bit of flour here, so I'm going to spread it out. And if you can see this coming out, it's very stiff, but it's going to be sticky yet, so it's going to take up quite a bit of flour. And make sure you take all rings and jewelry off, because if this stuff gets stuck in your Pandora bracelets, you're going to really be upset. So anytime you're working with doughs like this, you never know if you're going to accidentally get it in there or whatever. So, and I need to put a little flour on top, just keep it coated. Okay, so again, kneading. You're going to fold it to you, push away with the heels of your hands, give it a quarter turn, fold, push, fold, push. And you just keep doing this, and we're going to do this for about 8 minutes. And it will continually take up flour, and you add a little bit at a time. And see, I spread it away so I don't get too much in there, but I know I'll need that much. But that's what you're doing, is working flour in. And this will be a nice, hearty, tasty bread. Recipe said it makes three loaves, so most of the bread recipes are 2, but it does take quite a bit of flour. We've put in probably 5 or 6 cups already, so we may be up to the 7. Mm-hmm. I'm done kneading, and if you remember all that flour I had spread around there, I've used all of that, plus I had to add a little bit more. But the way to tell this is if you press a finger in and it pulls back, and it's nice and soft, it's pliant, it's elastic, and that's what you want. I need to prepare a bowl. I'm going to use the one I mixed in, and you have to grease them, so I'm going to take my wax paper, fold it over my hand, my fingers, tuck one end under my thumb, tuck the other end under my thumb. It's like a little envelope. And I'll get my Crisco, and all I'm going to do is just grease the inside of this bowl. You don't want a lot, but what you're going to do is grease it so that when you put the bread in, you're going to put the bread inside, turn it around so it's greasing the top of it, and then flip it over. So that way, while it is rising, it will have a little bit of grease coating and it won't get real stiff and crusty. So I'm going to cover this with a clean towel or wax paper and put it someplace so that it can rise. We want it to double. So the yeast is going to work, and it ought to be almost to the top of this bowl by the time it's ready. So we'll let this rest. I'm going to put it back in the corner over here so that it can be out of any drafts, and then we'll come back and shape our loaves. It's time to check the bread to see how this dough is rising, and I pulled it out and it's about double. It has a nice grainy look to it. So the thing you need to do is push your finger in and see the indentation remains. So I'm going to take my fist, and punch it, and it all kind of just, the air went out of it. So you press it together, and then the directions say to leave it rest for, and I always turn it over, leave it rest for about 10 minutes, and then I will take it out and shape it into bread loaves. The dough is rested for about 10 minutes now, and what you need to do is divide it into threes, because this makes 3 loaves. I have my loaf pans ready. They're greased and ready to go. So you try to get this as even as possible. And I think I need a little bit more on this one. Okay. So, what you're going to do is, on a lightly floured surface, you can either pat it out or roll it. And I like to use a rolling pin. Try not to get too much flour on anything. I'm going to roll this out. I know this seems a little funny to roll out bread, a loaf of bread that you're going to make, but that's how we do this. And it needs to be the length of the pan, but not longer than the pan. So I have my pans ready to go. And then you're going to start at one side, the length of it, and too much flour there, and tightly roll this. You want this nice and tight. Try to keep it even all the way through. And then at the end, when you get done, you need to pinch that. So that'll hold. And kind of smash it so it's, work it just so it needs to be the same width. You don't want it fatter at one end and narrower at the other. And it goes into your pan like this with the seam side down. And we will let this rise again. This is another, takes another time to rise. So I'll roll out the other 2, and then we'll let them rise for about a half an hour, and then they'll be ready to bake. The bread is done. I gave it an extra 5 minutes, 40 minutes instead of 35. So what you do to check a loaf of bread is you thump it with your finger. And it should have a hollow sound. The other thing you always want to do is brush the top with some butter. Now I didn't melt this, I'm just using my pastry brush, and this butter is very soft because it's really warm in here. I've been baking a lot today. That looks neat. So we'll brush it. This bread did not rise very much. It kind of filled the pan, but yet it didn't. And a couple reasons why this could be. Number one, it's whole wheat, a lot of whole wheat in there. That's a pretty heavy kind of flour. The other is maybe that yeast was not quite as good as what it should have been. So there's a couple reasons why. You need to leave this cool completely before you cut it. When you cut it, don't press down. You need to use a sawing motion. A serrated knife works best. So I'm going to pull all these out, and this is the yeast bread. So we are going to enjoy.